I've been involved in thinking deeply about where we are in this country and trying to figure out how we can move ahead more aggressively. We're making progress. Let's put that on the table. We're graduating more students than we did before, and we are obviously achieving higher levels than we have. But all of us know we're not moving fast enough and we're not getting to the results that we want. And trying to figure out why that is a really important thing to do. Because we've set new goals for education that no one had expected of us in the past. And that two-part goal now is to graduate every student, not the 75 to 80% that we're graduating in. For every one of them, that they're going to be college and career successful, Jeff, as you said earlier. So I've written a piece that's in draft right now with Linda Darling-Hammond around one of these issues. And because KVEC is entering into this period of reflection about where you are and where you're going, Jeff asked me to talk a little bit this morning about assessment. Probably the most exciting topic we could have, right? But I know there are many factors that are at play here in terms of needed areas for addressing where we are. I know that we've got governance structures we have to deal with. I know we've got educator preparation programs and professional support. I know that there are issues around socioeconomic status of kids and trying to improve that. I know we have to wrap around these youngsters much stronger support systems than what we have right now. But one other issue we've got to wrestle with is assessment and accountability. So as a person who was here when we created this assessment and accountability system, and being a part of this thinking over the last few years, I wanted to put something out. Now, I don't think all of you will want to pick up on this, but I do want to offer an invitation to those of you who think you're ready to begin to deal with this, because I think the environment is open right now for a few people who are deeply committed to reflect on this. And I think it's open because, one, we have gone through an evolution of thinking at the federal level around accountability for states. You know that although No Child Left Behind is the law of the land, no one is adhering to that right now. In effect, the interesting irony in this country is that more states are operating under waivers, administrative waivers, than are operating under NCLB requirements. Kentucky being one of those right now. And something really exciting is happening in that contractual relationship between states and the federal government over the last few years. There was this open invitation from the Secretary to present new ideas about how assessment and accountability might be carried out. And the states have taken some steps. You may know that those waivers are not there in perpetuity. They're going to end, and we're going to have to go through another set of waivers in a year and a half or so. So it's a great time to think about how one receives federal money in a state and how it can be used and the latitude that might be possible. The second part of it is that at the state level, there are some really serious conversations. Tommy could talk more directly about this than I, but there are conversations about what might be done in terms of assessment and accountability that might look different. So with all that said, sort of what might be done. And as you think about assessment and accountability in the state right now, I think all of us, if we were honest, could say we need a better system than what we have in place. Not that what we have done over the last few years has not helped us in terms of accountability. I think we could all point to improvements in the system over time. But the real purpose of assessment ought to be, as an integral part of the teaching and learning process, a way to improve learning and teaching. That ought to be the central theme. And right now, I would honestly say that the primary purpose of the state systems that are now in place is for external accountability. Now, when we develop those external accountability measures, it was important to do so because there was no system out there to hold folks accountable for the learning goals that we had set. But that alone is not going to get us to the excellence level that we're talking about. Now we're talking about personalization of learning. We're talking about multiple pathways for students. We're talking about differentiated learning programs. We're talking about much stronger diagnostic capacities being in place. We're talking about teachers being prepared in very different ways and whole new designs for professional development. Well, if we're going to go in that direction, then we've got to think about what the new assessment systems would look like. And I would say that the central thought behind this is that you build from the bottom up, not from the top down. It is still important that you have those external measures in the system, but as you all begin to think about how you begin to personalize learning, and as you begin to think about this, I would open the conversation around these ideas of how you build local agency in terms of assessment capacity, how you begin to, assessment might roll out differently in one school than it would in another school, that teachers might look at data very differently in one place than they would another in order to, again, to get to those lofty goals that we've set for our students. So I would just say the cornerstones of what we've been talking about and what we're going to continue to work on and with a number of states is this idea that the only way you're going to get to a program of customized, personalized learning that results in the kinds of outcomes that we have set for our children is that we move to a competency-based or a mastery-based learning program. That becomes a cornerstone of this personalization. In other words, we've got to determine somehow, what does that mean? What is college and career success, and how do you state that? Now, we have a good start on that with the new standards that exist in mathematics and English language arts and in the sciences, and the social studies folks are rolling that out in the state as well as the arts folks. So we are now beginning to define what we mean by success in those areas. But there is a next step that's going to be important by a group of educators, and that is, it's not enough to just come up with a statement about what college readiness or success is. You've got to begin to think about what does that mean for a student who is at this level, and how do they move to the next level. So the anchor on this is personalization for every child. In order to measure, to get there, we move to competency-based learning, and in order to do that, we've got to determine what those incremental steps toward mastery is. Because right now we're using grade level as the proxy for the readiness, which may or may not be the case. We're using courses as the proxy. Completion of courses is the proxy. But in this kind of a system, it's be important to set that taxonomy in place about how would one move through the system, how would you identify that, how would you state that, and how would you measure it. Once we do that, and I think that's where we're headed in the country right now, this is the way we begin to move students through the system in a way that we can assure that they're ready to move to the next level. You don't hold on to them until they are continually behind for years and lose that internal belief that they are smart. They know they're dumb at middle school many times. They call that, they say that to us, or they understand that they're ready to move on. We can't let the students languor in that kind of environment. So if we're going to do this, then it seems to me we can begin to develop a system where we rely on locally developed multiple measures of success as a basis for what we're doing. Now you build into that the state expectations, obviously, but those are only a part of this. And I would say that those expectations that are developed at the local level ought to be a community-wide conversation among the citizens in your community about what they want to see in terms of students and how we develop those. It would include the knowledge, it would include the skills that we're beginning to think about to be successful in work, career, and in citizenship, and it would include those kinds of dispositions that are important, that the state's not going to measure at all, but all of us know. Those are the critical attributes that make one of us successful and one of us not so successful. And thus, community needs to make those decisions. So we're talking about a system where we can measure growth and performance against a set of learning expectations over time as measured in a set of assessments that measure competency. That's very different than an externally developed assessment that's delivered by the state at the end of a learning experience, which becomes the basis for whether you're accountable as a student, a school, a district, or a state. One single measure cannot be relied upon to produce the kinds of information you need, and particularly a state assessment was built for institutional accountability, not for student accountability. And what we're having in our place now is this lack of building from what are the best kinds of evidence that we can gather over time in a repeating way at a local level that become the center of an assessment design, against which you can measure student progress, you can intervene, you can come back and talk about how you can redesign learning and teaching. If we do this and we build that kind of a system, it will look very different than the current system. And in my mind, those things need to count as much as that external assessment. Now, where I see the state assessment moving toward is a validation of the results that are coming from the local assessment. Those may or may not, and we'll get here sometime in the distant future, where the state assessment is administered to determine whether those local assessments are producing the accurate and valid and reliable results that are necessary. So it will be data driven. It would require some serious thought between some districts and some schools to get to this point where we could get this new system in place. But I believe that if you're interested, that we could begin to think about, as a result of this kind of new assessment system, we'd have much more accurate information about where every child is. We could accelerate students who are ready to move ahead aggressively in the learning process. We could begin to then think about stronger intervention strategies for students at incremental steps where they need that kind of intervention strategy to move ahead, and we could begin to see the results of where we hold on to every child and every one of those children are successful. I don't believe that we'll be able to do what we've been asking all of you to do, all of them college and career prepared and successful, without some deep thinking about what a new assessment design would look like. I think it will require a coordinated relationship with the state. I think it's not for everyone, but I thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to just say to you in this group, this is an appropriate time as you begin to think about this personalization. Some of you may be ready to begin to take this on, and some of you may want to move ahead. I have a revised paper, Jeff. We're rewriting that paper again, but we could share that with anyone who's interested to see if there is, it goes into much greater detail than what I've done in the summary this morning to give you a sense of how this new design might work. Again, I don't think it's, I want to be clear, this is not an easy way out. This actually would be more work than what we have in place right now. It's pretty easy to step back and assess yourself against an externally developed test at the end of the year. It's much more work to develop this kind of a system where you're constantly evaluating where kids are through multiple measures, readjusting the learning process. But it's also, I think, much more meaningful to the students and will produce the kind of results we're going to need. I think without it, we have a long shot to get those kids to the results they want. So we're going to be working on this. We're in conversations at the state level about some districts stepping out in this way and beginning to try some new things. There are obviously some competencies you need to have in place, and there are some institutional commitments that you need to have in place as a school district. You've got to have some commitment to supporting your teachers. You've got to have some commitment to begin to move the system in some new ways and new designs. You've got to have serious conversations with your communities about whether you want to move in this direction or not. But at least, to me, it's an area where somebody's going to have to step out and begin to redesign the systems in some way. Finally, we're in conversations with the Secretary about states and providing this kind of latitude. So I think there's a good possibility that Kentucky could be one of those states where we begin to see some innovative practices in this area. So thanks for the opportunity to lay it out.